So thank you very much for being there. Welcome to this the fourth event of the series on bilingualism, which has been designed, and the main idea was from Dr. Julio Villa-Garcia, who is senior lecturer at the University of Manchester, and whose field of research is focused in this subject. He will introduce our today's guest, Dr. Kay González-Vilbazo. Thank you, Kay and Julio, for being there and attending our invitation. And thank you very much for the audience, to the audience, to the public. This series we have organized throughout the year has the main object to enlighten, to show the not so obvious sometimes the advantages of bilingualism, multilingualism, which is sometimes not so easy to manage, in the sense that especially in the families where there are several languages that are used at the same time, sometimes there are challenges like which language should be used, the mother tongue, the language of the environment where the family is living. That is just an example. There are also another theories we could say, or a bit old, in the sense that it might be confusing to learn several languages or using several languages at the same time. So the goal of what we want to throughout this series is to show not only the advantages, but also to answer the questions that we all have about this matter. And today, Julio and Kay will analyze and discuss about the implications of learning several languages, and also how is the process, how difficult, not difficult, and also the participation of you or the public will be very important. So you can put the questions, and at the end of the dialogue between Julio and Kay, we will put the questions to our guests, and they will be delighted to answer you. So Julio will introduce Kay González, and I will introduce now Julio Villa-Garcia, who is currently a senior lecturer in Spanish linguistics and syntax in the Department of Linguistics and English Language at the University of Manchester. Dr. Villa-Garcia is in the course of his PhD at the University of Connecticut, was trained as a theoretical syntactician and as a language acquisitionist, working within the framework of minimalism. His current interests lie in the areas of Spanish, Romance, and English linguistics. Others interests include also child language acquisition, bilingualism, and the application of theoretical linguistics research to foreign second language pedagogy. So thank you again, Julio, for your support and for your ideas that have been the core ground for this series. But before I pass the floor to Julio, I would like to take the advantage to announce that next week, on the 29th of September, celebrating the International European Language Day, we have another meeting about in that date about the polyglot people. We had invited 2 polyglot people who had learned more than 10 languages, and it is organized with the Italian Cultural Center, the French Cultural Center, and of course Instituto Cervantes. So I hope to see you again on the 29th of September at 18 p.m. And now I give the floor to Julio. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias y espero que disfruten de la presentación.
Muchas gracias, Pedro. Muchas gracias a todos y a todas por estar aquí. It's a real pleasure to welcome you all. It's great to see so many friends from across the pond, many of them in the United States and in Canada. And well, thank you all for being here. I know this is a very special occasion because we have Kay González-Vilbazo, and I know that's we're all delighted to have him with us here. I know he needs no introduction, but I would allow him to introduce himself. So I'm going to start with one very light-hearted question, Kay. So the Canary Islands in Spain, Germany, Chicago, Canary Islands. How come? How many languages as a result? Oh.
Can you hear me now?
There you go, Kai.
I forgot to mute it. All right, so first of all, I would like to thank Instituto Cervantes for inviting me. It's a pleasure. It might be my last talk about bilingualism because I'm not in active research anymore. So this is a very special opportunity for me. And thank you, Julio, for thinking about me. It's a crazy idea, as you will see in a moment, but I still appreciate very much that you thought of me. And thank you all for being here. I know a lot of you. And I would like to just make two disclaimers before we start. One, as I just said, I'm not in active research, so I'm not going to tell you any new details about any ongoing research because there is no ongoing research with me. This is meant for the professional linguists in the audience. Love to see you. I'm not going to learn that much new from me today. And the second disclaimer is later. It doesn't matter. So, answering your question. Well, you know, I've lived all over the place because my family was very international and I was raised very internationally and multiculturally. I was raised between Spain and Germany and Barcelona. And so it was a mix of languages in the background all the time. And then the US was just chance and luck because someone who was actually in the audience saw me at the conference and gave me the opportunity to apply for the position in Chicago.
That's wonderful, Kai. Where did you do your PhD studies?
I did my PhD in Cologne, actually, and I'm very happy because in the audience, I can't locate him now, is my main informant of that PhD. I did my PhD on code switching, a specific code switching that was used, or is still used, I think, at the German school in Barcelona. It's called the Spluvish. And I myself attended that school, so I had a chance to, you know, get a lot of judgments myself, but I didn't trust myself, so I had other informants. And the main informant in the PhD is called KI, Kölner Informant, because I was living in Cologne back then, is in the audience. I'm not going to identify him because he might be embarrassed. I don't know.
That's great. Kai, do you consider yourself to be a polyglot?
Not really sure what that means, to be honest. I mean, definitely not one of those big polyglots, you know, the people that speak 10, 16, 20 languages. I speak 3 or 4 fluently, and then the rest, a bit more, a bit less. So maybe 6, 7, but 3, you know, are my main languages.
We'll go back to polyglots in a bit, but why, you know, in a nutshell, Kai, sorry, why would you say that we should all speak more than one language? Because we should, right?
Good question, and I think I have a surprising answer to that. I'd say it depends, to be honest. I mean, it's great, and everybody wants to, you know, we're all on the same boat here, right? It's great to speak many languages, and kids should learn many languages, but here's the key, I think the key to this. It doesn't make sense what a lot of people are doing right now, which is acquiring a language that you're not going to use ever in your life. You know, I have friends on the island here who send the kids to language classes. I hope he's not in the audience right now. And the kid is learning a language that you know the kid will never ever, or most likely never ever use, because it's a language that is from a country far away, and they have no relationship whatsoever with that culture, that language, or the country. So it makes sense to be bilingual if there's a reason to be bilingual. Most people are bilingual anyway, right? So statistically on the planet. But if you're not, it's a good thing if you can make use of it.
Nice. So there's always this claim about bilingualism that, you know, balanced bilingualism, right? The equilibrio between the languages we speak is an idealization that is far removed from reality. What do you think of that claim?
All right, that's a difficult question for me because that's not my main research field, as you know. I have an opinion, but it's probably not going to be the majority opinion here. So just to clarify, well, a multilingual is someone who speaks to some extent several languages, 2 or more languages, right? So when we talk about balanced bilinguals, behind that is the idea that you have a bilingual that is almost native-like in both or more languages, right? The problem with is that possible? I guess, to be honest, I don't know, but I guess to a certain extent, right? The problem with that is, and this is why I don't know, is I don't know how to measure that. I have no idea how you can really measure this. The only way you could measure it, which this is what I think L2 research does, second language acquisition research does, is establishing an ideal of an ideal speaker of that language, and compare the bilinguals to that speaker. And then if you get closer to that idealized speaker, then you're more proficient or competent, depending on the theory, or less. But I don't know who that speaker is and who determines who that idealized speaker is. And B, and this is even more complicated for me and a bigger problem, I don't know what the metrics is for measuring that, right? And I know there's a lot of great work on this, and people have given it a lot of thought. But I still don't see how we can measure that. This said, intuitively, I guess yes, there are almost balanced bilinguals. For me in the lab, was Luis is sitting here, my co-director of our lab in Chicago. The criterion I always use is a very informal one, but a very useful one, and it works. It's asking monolingual native speakers if that bilingual speaker, if the Spanish of that bilingual speaker, or the Tagalog, or whatever language it is, feels native to them. They have to rate it or judge it, and that's the criterion I used to use.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. We'll see if there are questions on that later on. So as Pedro Eusebio Cuesta, our director here at the Instituto Cervantes of Manchester, mentioned at the outset, on occasion of the European Day of Languages on the 27th, we will be interviewing a person who has mastered some 50 languages, and there's another individual who speaks 10. We know there are different levels of proficiency that can be attained by different individuals at different stages in the lifespan. But what's the upper limit? If somebody comes and asks you how many languages can be learned or can be acquired, is there an answer to that, or what would you answer?
If there is an answer, I don't know it. But what I can tell you, what I think I hopefully do know, is that from a linguistic point of view, right, from the linguistic machinery, from the language machinery in your mind, there's no upper limit. There's no problem in acquiring, in principle, unlimited languages, as many as you can imagine, right? The problem is a cognitive processing problem, right? A matter of memory and of time. In order to acquire a language and to acquire it to a certain level of proficiency, you need time. I remember there's a number out there saying that you need 25% of your daily linguistic input output to become a native speaker in a language, at least 25%. So if you acquire 50 languages, you'll have to do that with just 2% of your day. If you don't sleep, don't eat, and don't do anything else, right? So yeah, I think that's the question about the limit. The other interesting thing about this, and this is something I find fascinating, really, and it's counterintuitive, I think, is I think we're all multilingual, every single one. I used to say some years ago, monolingualism is the exception because most people on the planet are bilingual, officially bilingual. But now, if you widen a little bit the concept of language, right, which is it's not really a linguistic concept, it's a socio-political concept. And if you take into account that we all speak, or most of us speak, a dialect and a standard variety of our language, at least one dialect, that we speak multiple registers and are fluent and proficient in all those registers, a ton of them. If that is computed so that in the same mental system and the language module in our mind, then we're all multilingual. And then I don't know what the limit is, right? I mean, I can imagine.
So it's interesting that you talk about this 25%, but is there a number of years? In other words, you have to maximize the time you use speaking a language in order to acquire it. I assume as a child, right? During childhood, but how many years does it take for a person to become a bilingual or a native speaker of a language? Sorry.
So I'm not a specialist in acquisition, right? There are many acquisitionists sitting here in the audience. I'm really worried I will give an answer to this. I think that the general gist, what we can say, and this is directed towards the non-specialists. What you can say is the earlier you start, the better. Right. It seems to be, we used to talk about the critical window, right? A period in your life up to which it was much more easier to acquire a native language. Lately, or in the last year before I left, I was more hearing about a declining curve. So it's a steady process. It's getting more and more difficult, but there's no one point at which you stop being able to acquire a native language. The point is, the earlier you start, the better. But also, and this is key, it depends, how you acquire it. So how you're exposed to that language, how much input are you going to get? Is it going to be 25% of your daily input? Is it going to be 5% of your daily input? Is it going to be in a class environment? Is it going to be in a family environment? Is it going to be a natural environment? And it depends if there are interruptions, right? Say you start as a baby, get 2 years of, I don't know, French, and then stop for 10 years, and then go again. Well, certainly better than not having done anything, but it's not going to be very helpful just having had those first 2 years, right? So what you need is balance, right? You want to start as early as possible, to get as much input as possible, and to be as consistent and continuous as possible.
Perfect. I think somebody was raising their hand, so please, by all means, if you want to say something or add to something in the discussion, just unmute yourselves and we'll be very happy to listen to your comments, or else you can wait until the end. Okay, you have 2 seconds to decide. 2, 1, 0. Luis, go ahead.
Of course.
Yeah, in the context of the answer that you gave, that one should become bilingual to the extent that the second language is going to be usable to that person, somebody could misinterpret that and take it to mean that you think that people should only learn languages that will become useful in their professional lives, that is English, and that people should forget about minority languages, which have, you could say that they have limited usage within their communities, or maybe no usage or very little usage within the communities, and no usage, of course, outside of the communities. So could you tell us something about your views on minority language bilingualism?
Yeah.
And to what extent it's useful to promote them?
Yeah. All right. So, of course, Luis is right? What I meant to say, and it might have not been very clear, what I wanted to say is, when I say use, what I meant is you have to have some connection to that language and culture, right? That doesn't have to be a professional one, right? It can be, and most importantly, it should be a passionate one, right? Some kind of emotional relationship you have with that language, right? If you're not, I mean, this is especially important for kids. I've been advising international schools in Spain and Portugal, and almost the most important thing I always insist on is it doesn't help sending your kid to a German or a French school, Instituto Francés or Instituto Cervantes, unless you really have a connection with that culture, right? That's why Instituto Cervantes doesn't just offer languages, but they offer also cultural activities. You want to establish that connection. Otherwise, it's crazy. As for minority languages, I know there's some Catalan speakers in the audience, friends from Barcelona and actually from school. And of course, I'm a big fan of minority languages. Actually, to the point where I find myself in a crazy situation because I'm defending on the Canary Islands that we should defend the Canarian, what they call dialect, right? And that's an almost impossible endeavor because since 2 years ago, we have more people on the islands that were born in mainland Spain than people that were born on the Canary Islands, which makes it very difficult at school for the kids to keep their well, the way of speaking, their dialect, let's call it, right? So yes, of course, you should learn as many. So here's an idea actually for Spain. I never understood why we don't have that. I don't get why you cannot learn Catalan at school or Galician or Astur or whatever in the Canary Islands. This is, I mean, if we're really defending the plurality of culture and languages in Spain, we shouldn't shy away, even if it costs a lot, doesn't matter. We should have the opportunity of at least learning something about those languages, right? That would be a great way of integrating different communities into a common educational project.
Interestingly, however, you can learn Catalan at many universities across the world, and you can learn Catalan at the Instituto Cervantes, because as you know, it's not just Spanish, it's the languages of Spain.
Yeah.
Very nice. So bilingualism, and then we narrow down to code switching, which is your area of expertise. Why code switching, Kai? Why? Why is it important?
All right, so I came across code switching because I used it myself, right? As a bilingual German-Spanish speaker, and at the German school, and some of my friends are actually here in the audience, we used to mix German-Spanish a lot. That's called code switching, right? When you take words or parts of sentences from one language and build up the sentence with words from two or more languages, right? And when I started studying linguistics, I realized there was quite a lot on, well, not quite a lot. There was some research on code switching, but very little from a theoretical point of view, which is what I was interested in, right? And so, well, and I had this opportunity of going to the German school and having that experience, so I started looking into it. And the more I started looking into it, the more it became clear that this is not a random phenomenon. This is something that is this is as linguistic and as language as any monolingual sentence or any monolingual discourse, right? Once you figure that out, then the question is, of course, okay, so how does it work? If it's rule-based, if it's rule-governed, if it's not completely random and wild, how does it work? What are the limits? What are the rules of code switching? And it's taken us quite a while, and there's a lot of people involved in this, right? Jeff McSwan, Luis Lopez. I'm not going to mention them because there are many, and I'm going to forget some. But I think that the common conclusion we all arrive, or most of us arrive to a certain extent at least, is that code switching basically works, not just basically, it works like any monolingual language. There's nothing that is different in code switching than if you have a code switching sentence. There's nothing different in it from a linguistic point of view than if you have, say, a monolingual Spanish sentence or a monolingual German sentence.
Wonderful. So on occasion, there's been this claim that some languages cannot participate in code switching with other languages because they are typologically different and so on. Is this a misconception? Is this a myth? Yeah,
it is. I mean, I haven't found an impossible code switching pair so far, right? As long as both languages are human languages, right? So if you mix Klingon, not sure what happens, or if you mix Esperanto. But as long as you take two natural languages, natural human languages, in principle, there's no problem in mixing them. And actually, the more diverse typologically the languages are, the more promising it might be to study those pairs, right? So if you really, so for instance, Luis and I studied, well, Luis and a couple of students of us, right? We studied a code switching between Southern Taiwanese and Spanish, and it gave us a lot of information, very interesting information that we couldn't have obtained otherwise, at least not that I'm aware of, that led into very interesting insights into the determiner phrase, the noun phrase, the part of the sentence around the noun in Taiwanese, right? And it became an interesting and successful paper in an East Asian languages journal. So, so studying and code switching for a researcher, for a linguist, is like having a microscope. You can start seeing things that you couldn't see before, right? All of a sudden, you can start putting things together, say, okay, if this theory is right, then this feature and this feature shouldn't be able to go together. Let's find a language that has this feature, and let's find a language that has that feature, and let's see what happens if we mix them. Mm-hmm. And so you can test a lot of things that otherwise you wouldn't be able to.
Mm-hmm. So our colleague Ingo Feldhausen has a question at this juncture. So please, Ingo.
Okay, thank you. Kai, you mentioned before that, well, by code switching works like any monolingual grammar. So the question came up in my mind. You said you are Spanish-German bilingual, and you did code switching. So would you say you have 3 grammars in your head, one for German, one for Spanish, and one for, well, the code switching language? Or would you say it's 2 grammars and they somehow interact?
All right, so I would say we have 1 grammar, right? Now this has to be specified a little bit, right? This sounds a little bit counterintuitive, right? So the idea is this: from a theoretical point of view, if you study languages from a theoretical point of view, within the framework, say, of broad framework of generative theory, you don't have to be a dogmatic about anything. Then the idea is that you have a series of universal operations that you're basically born with, right? Such as merge or agree. There's a few of those, right? And what then happens is that you take words, those are idiosyncratic, words you have to learn, and each word comes with a series of features. Let's say take a German noun or a Spanish noun has gender features, for instance, right? It has semantic features, so you know what it means. It has phonological features, and so on and so forth. The operations, the universal operations, give you a way, your brain a way, your mind a way, of computing those elements, of taking those elements and putting them together and see if those features can work together or not. If they don't, you cannot build a sentence. If they do, you can build a sentence. So the idea behind this is you have 1 grammar. Maybe phonology is a special case in this situation, but other than that, 1 grammar, and I would even go further and say 1 lexicon. So you have just 1 big bag in which you have all the words, and because your brain won't care really. Your language module doesn't care about languages, right? It cares about features. Now, if I'm talking not to linguists, then I would say, yeah, you probably have, I don't know how to answer that actually. I'd say you probably have, let's say 3 grammars. But just know that this is a lie, right? I don't believe in this. I'm just saying that to make it simple and so that people can deal with it. But actually, if the operations merge and agree are all the same for all languages, or just the way syntax works, then there is no language-specific grammar in that sense, right? At least for syntax morphology, and for semantics, of course, right? That's not new.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. So we are always talking about code switching, and we think of polar opposites. As Ingo just pointed out, you have language A, language B, and this kind of in-betweenness. But how many languages can be code switched at once? If you speak 6 languages and your interlocutor speaks the same 6 languages, can you potentially code switch among the 6 of them, using the 6 of them back and forth?
Yes, sir, and you should. And should enjoy it too. So here's the point, and this actually connects to Ingo's question. Let's use an analogy here. If you think about how do we build a sentence, right? What's going on in the language module in the mind, and you can think of it in the following way. When I earlier said there's just 1 grammar, a few operations that are universal. Think of it like how you put together a molecule. Okay, how do we put H2O together? Well, there's 2 elements that are relevant for a linguist: grammar and lexicon. For a physicist, universal physical laws and the properties of the atoms, right? So if you take two oxygen atoms, they won't go together. The properties of those oxygen atoms are such that they're not going to be happy and won't form one molecule, a more complex structure. But if you take two hydrogen atoms and an oxygen atom and combine them, because of the properties of these atoms, plus the universal laws of physics that apply everywhere, and are not specific for Spain, Germany, or Mars, the universal, you get a molecule. This is the idea, is an analogy of about how we could imagine how building a sentence works. If that analogy is correct, at least to some extent, then there's no limit. And the reason is this: there's no limit to how many languages you can mix in a sentence. Because the brain, the language module in your brain, the part of your brain that does all these calculations and helps you translate thoughts into some ways, right? The language module. The language module doesn't know about Catalan, Spanish, Canadian, or Tagalog. The language module knows about features, maybe rules, order of certain things, right? Very abstract things. Language is not a natural primitive. German or Spanish are not primitives of the mental system, right? Those are the Spanish and French are useful ways of talking, socio-political ways of talking about a community of speakers and what they share, right? There's a large overlap in the competence of those speakers, so we call it German. But we all know that if you take someone from the very far north of Germany and put them into a Brauhaus in southern Germany, in Bavaria, for instance, it might not be easy actually to understand each other. And we still call it German in a way, right? So this is a fiction that's useful to talk about certain things, but it's not what's happening in the brain, right? At least that's why I believe. What you have in the brain is abstract features. Therefore, the brain doesn't know that you're using words of 6 or 7 languages. The brain says, okay, I have 6 words here. Each word has certain features. Let's put them together. Let's see what happens if we apply these operations, agree on merge and so on. And it either works or doesn't work. So there's no conceptual limit to it, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know if this is clear. It might be a little bit abstract. I'm not sure.
Our director has a question.
Yes, I would like to ask a very fascinating point. If you are a researcher about this subject, the brain automatically chooses the word that is more appropriate to externalize the idea. I give an example. There are concepts that are present in one language and are very thoroughly expressed in just one word, but you cannot find in the other languages. So the brain automatically does it choose the words that give the idea or shows what you want to mean with those words that are not unique but almost unique in this word, in this language. I think if, for example, saudade is a word in Portuguese that we don't have in Spanish or French, or Fernweg in German. We don't have any idea of to have the desire to travel. We don't have. So is that the brain will choose those words that you don't, that are easier to express these ideas that fits in those languages and not in the others?
Right. Good question. And it's a very relevant question for code switching, because if you have 2 words meaning basically the same thing, which one do you choose? And why do you choose German or Spanish in a certain situation, right? And one of the things that has been pointed out by specialists, which is not my case. I'm not a specialist in psycholinguistics, but one of the things is precisely that it's very unusual to have. Well, it's not unusual. There are a lot of words that are not absolutely semantically equivalent to the same word in the other language, right? So one of them might be closer to the concept you have in your mind and that you want to express, as you just said. Fernweh is a good example. Saudade also. I think that's probably a trigger of why you would choose one or the other. Just notice that I'm careful here because there's some people in the audience that are much better at this than I am, and they should raise their hand and answer this. Because I'm not trying to answer why you choose one or the other. I'm trying to answer the question of, if you want to say something and you have a pre-selection of words that, both languages that would work to express that if you put them together in a certain way, how does the linguistic system then do that, right? So my question is really about the mechanics of how does that work, right? You're asking me why, if I have a bicycle, why do I go to Paris instead of to Madrid? And I'm asking, how does the bicycle work, right? And that's just a different level of not a different area of questions, right? But I think intuitively, please correct me. I know there are great specialists in the audience. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'd say this, what you pointed out, is a factor, is a relevant factor, actually.
Yeah. No, I'm just thinking. This is food for thought, so that's why it's taking me time to come back to my preconceived questions. All right, so Kay, some people may wonder what goes on in a laboratory that is devoted to code switching, and you have some experience of that, so maybe you can point it out to us.
Thank you for asking. Love this question. Yes. So Don Luis was sitting, at least in my screen, right underneath me, which I like. Both of us, we founded the Bilingualism Research Lab at UIC, at University of Illinois in Chicago, quite a few years ago. I'm not really sure how long ago, but some years ago. I'm not part of the lab anymore. I haven't been made honorary president or anything like that. So I'm just a loving friend who wishes them all the best and tries to figure out how they're doing. But when we started very small. We started exactly with that question, right? So how does bilingualism work, and from a theoretical point of view? And we've thought that code switching is an extraordinary tool to study that. It hadn't been studied that much at that point, right? Jeff Foxon had done a lot, but there weren't that many people. Mike Scott had done some, and there's some people, but from a theoretical point of view, not that much. And so it was very successful. We had a lot of great grad students, most of them, I think, actually on a tenure track job or tenure. Brad Hood was here a moment ago. I think Brian Karankovic is also tenured. And they're all placed in almost all in great universities. The great thing about this is that the whole department, this was in the Spanish department, hosted in the Spanish department at UIC. And the great thing is that the whole Spanish department became like a hub, a center of gravitation for bilingualism, right? We had neurolinguistics interested in second language acquisition. We have a phonologist specialized in second and third language acquisition. There's a new guy now, well, there's a bunch of new guys at the department who are specialists, Jose Camacho, Lina Sanchez, right? David Miller, people that are fantastic researchers. We have sociolinguist Kim Podolsky, who's specialist in bilingualism. So it's a really good team that tracks great students, and I have to say with some pride, although I'm not part of the team anymore, I think they were really well trained when they left. When they left us, they were good linguists, professional linguists.
Sounds like a great environment to work in. Very inspirational.
I love it. I miss it very much.
I'm going to ask you some questions that the audience is that people in the audience are posing, because I think they are actually very interesting. To what extent do you feel that pronunciation of a language is helpful in making yourself understood? This is from Josie McHugh.
Not sure if I understand the question correctly, but of course, you have to pronounce it well enough so that the native speakers who are hearing you can understand what you're saying, right? So keep in mind. So what does grammar and language do actually? I think this is important. You have to understand the language module in your mind is a translation machine, right? What it does, it takes ideas, thoughts from your brain, and is able to take them from your brain and put them into another person's brain. In this case, into a lot of people, right? I'm thinking something, and it's getting through the ether somehow and the internet to all your brains. Now, how does that work? Well, what we do is the language module translates thoughts into sound waves, right? And those sound waves are then decodified again in your brain and turned into, through the language module, through the linguistic system, into thoughts. Now, if the sound waves you produce are not recognizable or not identifiable as linguistic structures or the correct linguistic structures at the recipient's end, then it's going to be very difficult to really convey that thought from one brain to another, right? So yes, being able to pronounce to a certain extent is important, right? Do you have to speak like a native speaker? No way. Most of us don't speak like native speakers in English, and we communicate in English, and we understand each other, and are very happy.
Gracias.
Thank you, Josie. Would you like to follow up?
No, it was extremely helpful. It was really changing from languages. German can be very guttural, and so it would be difficult. And certainly I know as an English speaker, it can be difficult. So speaking Spanish, you have to really pronounce your R's and the intonations as well. So, but thank you very much.
No, thank you very much for the question. Actually, as a matter of fact, acquiring a language and the phonology of a language is usually difficult. But it turns out learning Spanish pronunciation is for most people not as difficult as it is for Spaniards learning German, for instance, or English or French, right? It's probably due to some extent to the phonological system of Spanish, which is, has less vowels than English, and the phonological system is careful with that, but it seems to be a little bit less complex, or at least it contains, it's part of it is a subset of the system in French or in German.
Yes. Gracias. Muchas gracias.
There was another interesting point by Kathy Hargreaves. Sorry if I mispronounce your names. And I'm going to read verbatim. Right. If you allow yourself to be in the habit of code switching when speaking with another person who speaks the same languages as you do you risk losing the ability to speak the pure language with someone who only speaks one of the languages? I've always worried about this, and so try to avoid the natural inclination of mixing languages when speaking to someone who shares the same languages as me.
Yeah, awesome question. This is a good question. I get asked this question in a similar question about kids, and there's a period that kids seem to be confused about this, right? When they acquire 2 or more languages. I would say no. I mean, as long as you still have enough input. I mean, if you code switching, as a matter of fact, is just a sign of your high competence in the monolingual varieties that you're using and that you're mixing in code switching, right? You cannot be a good code switcher in, say, Catalan, Japanese, unless you're a good speaker of Catalan and Japanese, unless you're high competent in Japanese and Catalan, right? Otherwise, what are you going to mix, right? You need to take it from those languages. As for kids, and this is, I think, very relevant, when we try to raise our kids multilingually, there is a period, and I think that's, please again, correct me if anybody's in the audience that knows better. But it seems there is a period in which bilingual kids that code switch, right? Code switch even with people that are not bilingual, right? So imagine, in my case, my daughter was raised English, Spanish, and German speaking, but the grandmother is not. The grandmother just speaks Spanish, right? And my daughter would mix all languages, code switch with her. And of course, my mother-in-law would say, well, this girl is not learning Spanish, proper Spanish. She's confused, right? I think this is a misunderstanding. Turns out all these kids eventually fully acquire those languages. I don't know any bilingual code switcher that, unless you have some kind of brain damage or something, but under normal circumstances, I don't know any that reaches the age of adulthood and has problems with the native languages, monolingual languages, right? But this is interesting because it helps me to say something about, explain something about code switching, or make the point even hopefully clearer. Think about this, right? Take a bilingual kid, Catalan Japanese, and so this kid has got the input and knows a bunch of words, some of them meaning more or less roughly the same, right? So let's imagine this kid now wants to say a sentence, a 7-word sentence, wants to build up the sentence. So there's a big bag with all the words that the kid knows in there, and the kid starts picking and saying, oh yeah, okay, this is a great word. This I'm going to use in my sentence. And then goes, picks another one and says, nah, this is not what I meant to say, and eventually picks 7 words, puts them in a lexical array and in some starting point, and from there on starts building the sentence. Now, if all the words we know, Spanish, Catalan, and Japanese, are in this one bag, hopefully we all know enough stats to know this and probability. How high is the likelihood that you're going to pick 7 Spanish words? Very low. Or 7 Catalan words, or 7 Japanese words. It's very low. The likelihood, the most likely outcome is that you're going to mix. You're going to take randomly 3 Catalan words and 4 Japanese words, put them together. So the expected outcome for a kid that is not aware that there are other speakers that are monolingual, it's not aware that there are other speakers that are not bilingual, the expected outcome for a kid is that they produce code switching, because it's the easiest and most likely thing to happen. It's very unlikely, without special effort, that you produce a monolingual Catalan sentence or monolingual Japanese sentence. It's just, probability. And so what I think happens is at a certain age, and it's pretty early actually, age 3 something, kids start realizing that this is a sociolinguistic component, right? Kids start realizing that not all speakers are bilingual, and that not all speakers understand what I'm saying when I mix. And so they start that even if they pick out a mix of words, they start saying, okay, grandma only speaks Spanish, let's take these Japanese words and try to find the equivalent in Catalan, or Spanish, okay? And so, yeah, what this tells you basically is that, again, the code switching is the same as a monolingual construction. All you do is picking words from a bag and putting them together the same way you put them, whether it's a bunch of of words from one language, from 2, or from 16, doesn't really matter. But if you can put 7 words together from 16 languages, that's probably difficult.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense, because many times we see that bilingual children, tend to treat the same word for either language. They tend to treat them as synonyms, basically, because for them they mean the same, right?
Right. Yeah. So actually, I stumbled upon this because of my daughter, because I had this issue, right? She was code switching and wasn't interested at all in the fact that some people were not able to understand her because they were monolingual speakers, until, and I think it might be a coincidence. This is anecdotal, right? I need a specialist to study this. Might have been studied already. Until I witnessed one day in the playground that my daughter she was sitting in the playground playing with another kid, and the kid had a toy. She pushed, not nice, but she pushed the other kid away and took the toy. Then went up and talked to the mother and said, can I please keep this, right? The key part here is that that moment I realized, okay, my daughter just learned that you use language differently depending on who you talk to or who you interact with. That child wasn't good enough to be, asked or said, please. The other child was good enough just to be pushed away. But the mom, she realized, oh, mom needs a different register. I need the word please here. Once your brain, this is hypothesis. Someone please, there might be already studies. Once the brain realizes that, then it's just a very small step to understanding also that, oh, look at this. This person is not able to use all these words, just these other words. Still is a register, right? So, that's the way I think about it.
Great. So I'm going to read some very interesting questions by Professor Javier García Oliva, Professor of Law, not of Linguistics, at the University of Manchester. The first one is as follows. I was quite interested in Kay's definition of bilingualism. According to Kay, a bilingual person is that person who would be regarded as a native speaker by a monolingual person. Following that rule, those of us who speak our second language with a foreign accent, despite the fact that we use our second language far more often than we use our mother tongue, for instance, in the professional field, etc., would never be bilingual.
Correct. Yeah, this was a misunderstanding. Sorry, I didn't explain myself clearly here. That was referring to balanced bilinguals, right? So if you have a bilingual that we claim is a native speaker of both languages, then you can use the criterion of having other speakers evaluate them. But of course, anybody who speaks to some extent, more than one language is a multilingual speaker. I mean, you're a lawyer, so I'm going to be very careful here, but I think you will have to tighten the definition depending on what it is you need it for, right? From a linguistic point of view, and I'm sure for legal cases, this might be very different, right? You have to find a different way. But from a linguistic point of view, it's good enough to say, yeah, as long as we speak one word, to be honest, you're a bilingual speaker. I said earlier, I don't think there are monolingual speakers, right? Just don't exist.
Mm-hmm. And the second one, which I think is a very interesting one personally, has to do with the fact that the question is, do we need to speak more than one language? It is, of course, fascinating to do so, but I can also think of many monolingual people who are just brilliant, and I would not like to think that those of us who speak more than one language are in a better place.
I would love to think that, but I don't think we are. Not necessarily, at least, right? I mean, being a bilingual, and with the caveat I mentioned earlier, right? Only if being a bilingual because you use it, not because you go to Sunday school or they force you to go and you'll never speak it, right? But if you really use it and you're really bi or multilingual, that can have a lot of advantages, right? So not just that you are multicultural and have access to many more things that you would have as a monolingual speaker, but also it has advantages with respect to, cognitive. I mean, again, I'm not a specialist in this field, but it seems that bilinguals have slightly better chances of getting better off with dementia. So less dementia, for instance, or Alzheimer. This is said to be one of the Bialystok used to say that, at least. She hadn't changed her mind. That was the state of the art back then. But more importantly, this is something I tell schools also, and parents at schools when I give talks in advising international schools mostly, is the big advantage that we all get is opening our minds, right? So if you speaking more than one language gives you access to more than one culture, usually, right? Being immersed in two different cultures, makes you less fearless of encountering a new culture or experience because you've been through it already. But secondly, and even more importantly, it teaches you that different cultures, different people do things differently. Let me give you an example. I remember when I got to Germany to do my PhD in Cologne, one of the first things I got to do, because my Doktorvater, my PhD advisor, Jürgen Lehnertz, told me to do so, is to take a massive Excel sheet. And he told me, go and check if everything is correct. And don't come back until you're sure it's correct. So, you know, I'm a Spaniard. I took it back. Half an hour later, I was back. I said, I think it's good. And he said, no. I didn't ask you to think it's good. Make sure it's correct. Take it home. I expect you to work on this at least a week. It's very difficult. I don't want any mistakes in this. All right. So I took it back, worked on it, came back after some days. And Lehnertz again told me, are you sure? And I said, well, what do you mean sure? He said, 100% sure. Said, well, 100% sure. For a Spaniard, there is no 100% sure, ever. We might live forever. Not even death is 100% sure. How would you know? Well, apparently in Germany, that's different, because my PhD advisor wanted me and was convinced it was possible to be 100% sure. Is this better? Well, I thought so. I was very proud of myself. I thought, well, look at this. My mind just learned something fantastic. I've moved from becoming from being a less careful Spaniard to be a very, very careful German, right? Until I got to the US. There I learned, yeah, of course you can be 100% safe, or you can make an effort, but why would you? Why do more than absolutely necessary, right? You know, go as far as it needs to go, not any further. So these things that seem banal and not important, actually, I think, shape your way at looking at the world and the way of how you interact with the world and how you live your life deeply, really deeply, probably more deeply so than your job or many, many other things.
That's pretty good. Javier, I don't know if you have a follow-up question.
Well, Julio, if I may, Kay, as I said, I'm an academic lawyer, then I'm not a linguist, and I was absolutely fascinated by the presentation. I just wanted to, yeah, definitely wholeheartedly concur with what you just said. I just would like to add a couple of, obviously I was fascinated by your first definition of bilingualism that probably I misunderstood, but I'm also quite fascinated by this second definition that basically implies that there are no monolingual people on earth, because everybody is going to know a few other words in a second language. Then whenever I think of a bilingual person, I'm thinking, but probably that's not the right definition of somebody who obviously is native in one language and has, or may well be native in two languages, but if it's not native in the second language, has a certain command of the language and is completely fluent. But obviously, probably we disagree with each other, and you're probably right, because I'm not a linguist. But the second point I was trying to make is about the fact that, of course, I couldn't agree with you more about the beauty of learning a second language. I think my life has been brilliant since I came to the UK. I could learn English. I have been able to develop my academic career in my second language. And I wouldn't change one bit of my life in that sense. But I have also come across quite a few people who are polyglot or are bilingual, and they look down on monolingual people like, oh, well, these people are not, even people who have said, I would never date a monolingual person. I think we can reach that level in our lives, because I think that's big-headed. I wouldn't want to think that I am a more interesting person than my father, who never had the opportunity to learn a second language. That was the reason of this reflection. Yeah. But obviously, I very much agree with what you said. Thank you very much, because it was thoroughly enjoyable.
Thank you very much. I think we actually agree more than you think. Even on the first point, I mean, of course, being bilingual doesn't make you a better person, a more interesting person. You can, I know people that are really disgusting. I don't want to have anything to do with them, and they're multilingual. Obviously, I mean, this is right. Now, does it give you an opportunity, especially for young people, does it give you an opportunity that others lack? I think so, right? What you make out of it, that's up to you, of course, right? And how you behave in life, that's up to you, of course. Being bilingual doesn't help in being a better or nicer person. That's a matter of your psychology and your personality. Now, as to the bilingualism question, let me clarify this, because this is confusing. I think it's very important really to understand this. All right, so let's go to take a step back and go talk about languages again, right? At some point I said there's no such thing as a language, right? And usually this is something linguists or some linguists at least are happy with and have no problem with, but most people don't even know what that means, because we all deal with languages continuously and we can identify them, right? So what I'm saying is, of course, there's something like languages, which is a social object. It's something, it's a concept that we use when we talk about social aspects of our life, right? So I can, when I say Catalan is a language, what I'm referring to is the community of speakers that more or less share the same competence with respect to, you know, a number of words and rules or whatever. That's what we call Catalan. Fine, good enough. For 99% of the things we need in life and we use in ordinary language, and that's perfect, right? As a lawyer, you might need a slightly different definition depending on what it is you want to achieve, right? As a linguist, however, as a theoretical linguist interested in the human language faculty, right? I'm interested in how humans, how the language module works in humans. How come we speak and what is it that happens when we speak, right? Roughly. And given that I'm not interested in the social aspect of it, or less interested and less interested in the political aspect of it as a researcher, and once I start looking into the theory, I realized, well, it probably doesn't make sense to think, how would the brain know that a word is Spanish or English? It would have to have a little language index, which is a category that's just completely non-linguistic. It's not even mental in a way, I think, right? And it's not necessary and conceptually wrong from a linguistic point of view, from a theoretical linguistic point of view. Take all the German speakers here in the audience. I bet if you make a test, thorough enough test, there are not two of them who have the exact same competence. They all have a slightly different knowledge with respect of what their native language is, right? It will vary a little bit. And this is a matter of degree. You can have two siblings that grow up together in the same household, monolingual German speakers from Bottrop, happy people, fantastic, everything's great. If you test them, I'm pretty sure you can find differences. But there's definitely more difference between these two and someone living 300 kilometers away. And there's even more distance and more differences between these and someone who was raised third generation in the US. Grandparents were German, but this is a heritage speaker of German somewhere in Pennsylvania or whatever. This gives you degrees of this, of distance from each other. Up to what point do you say, yes, what this person speaks is still German? And I'm not saying it's impossible to decide on such a point. What I'm saying is this is not a linguistic decision. It's going to be a social decision, it's going to be a political decision, a legal decision. It's just not a linguistic decision. There's no linguistic primitive or argument that would allow you to make the cut at any specific point. Therefore, we talk about speakers with certain competences, and these competences, the knowledge about the language, these might overlap a lot or a bit less, or nothing, right? You speak Japanese, I speak Spanish, the overlap is zero, almost zero, I think. That is what I mean by languages. Now, bilingualism inherits those problems. If there are no languages, from a linguistic point of view, what does it mean to be bilingual then? Speak two languages if we don't have languages. That's why I'm saying there's no difference between monolinguals and bilinguals, because there's no such thing as language in that sense. And your competence usually includes not just the words and knowledge about your native language and stuff that you acquired when you were a kid, but also words that we would, from a social, political point of view, consider to be part of a different language, right? Pizza, in almost every language. I'd say pizza is probably now an English word, or a German word, or a Spanish word, but it definitely originated as an Italian word, right? Is someone who knows the word pizza or I don't know, whatever language, is that a multilingual speaker? That depends. If you looking at it from a socio-political legal point of view, define it however you see fit, right? Whatever works for you. If you look at it from a linguistic point of view, I'd say, yeah, I don't even get the question, to be honest. There's someone who knows something, and this person still knows something different. And what interests me is, how does this knowledge work? Right. I don't know if that makes it any clearer, probably not, but I tried.
Absolutely, Kay.
Absolutely brilliant. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
As one of our previous speakers called it, Professor Yaron Matras, a former colleague at the University of Manchester, we have repertoires, right? Linguistic repertoires rather than languaging.
Right. Yeah.
So let's move on to a couple of interesting questions. Okay. Shirley Wang asks the following one. Should be quick and easy. When I start to learn a new language, I always start from grammars and vocabulary, but it ends up with my poor listening skills. What's the best way to start?
Well, if I knew that, I would be rich. That's the $1 million question, right? How do you learn a language most efficiently? Trust me, nobody knows. Otherwise, they would be really, really rich, right? Can imagine, right? Google is working on it. Everybody's working on it, trying to figure that out, or even translating, and nobody has figured it out. So we really don't know. There's a lot of research and second language acquisition that will help you, right? I was raised in second language acquisition in Chicago because I had no prior or very little prior knowledge, and the environment in Chicago is that of a what would call a communicative approach. So the heavily influenced by, at least in Chicago back then, by Bill and Patton. And I think that the main idea is to be as immersive as possible and to provide as much input and output as possible. So from day one, you actually want to hear language, including pronunciation, and want to produce language, including pronunciation. Now, of course, you can hopefully accelerate the process if you, instead of randomly getting input and output, and produce an output, you have someone specialist in the field who can tell you, well, do these exercises first, then do those, and then the next one, because there's a certain order to acquisition. I think we might disagree on what the phases are and what the exact order is, but I think we all agree there are phases and order in how you acquire a language, right? And finally, one of the big tricks is not to go crazy with grammar. What you're learning when you learn grammar, what we call grammar, traditional grammar, right? The subject has to go here, the verb has to go there, passive works this way. What we call traditional grammar, that is not information that gets to the right place, right? It is valuable information. I love learning about languages. I'm a linguist, thank goodness. Yeah. But I used to be a linguist, sorry. I forget. Your language module works autonomously, right? If you're exposed to language, right, your language module is working and is dealing with that, regardless of whether you know the rules or not. If you learn a rule, right, if someone explains to you the rule, that goes to the central module, and the central module is not connected to the peripheral language module in the mind. This is, cognitive science. So if that's true, then it's not really that helpful. I think what is helpful are all the examples your grammar teachers give you. That's input that the language module can use and process. And meta-linguistic knowledge, I know a lot of people say it's helpful, and I'm sure in a way it is, but it's not the main resource, right? Learning grammar is not how you acquire a language. It might help, but what you need is input and output, I think.
Pablo has a very nice question. With bilingual kids, should we enforce somehow the languages spoken at home? In my case, I'm Spanish, my wife is Chinese, and we live in the United Kingdom. So the chat is going down. Sorry. So it's very vibrant. So I kind of avoid exposing my kids to English at home. For example, no movies in English at home, only Spanish or Chinese. Since I feel that if I don't do that, they will end up speaking only in English.
Yeah, great, I agree. So the dominant language is, of course, the place you live in, right? So if you live in the UK or in the States, or in Australia or South Africa, English is going to be dominant. Now, if you're lucky and you have one parent, as a native speaker from one language and the other from another language, then yeah, do that. I mean, I only spoke with my daughter in German, my wife only in Spanish, and everybody else in the US in English. So that's why she's trilingual, right? Let me tell you, it's not always easy. There are a lot of factors that play in, right? So if you don't understand the language of your partner and your kids start talking with the partner, you might feel excluded. So there's a lot of things going on that makes the situation way more complex. But in principle, I'd say, yeah, of course, enforce your language. And the way of enforcing it, at least I found personally, this is also anecdotal, is to use the fairness, the moral card. So my daughter would start speaking in English, and I would say, this is so unfair, Lila. In German, of course. This is so unfair. This is my culture, my language, my country, my background, which is not really true because I'm, more Spanish. But anyway, and then immediately she would say, "Oh, I'm sorry," and switch back to German. And this probably is a process that takes until they're grown-ups.
It's amazing to listen to you because obviously, you've given up the field and you are no longer an academic, but, since you like analogies, I'm thinking of this idea we always say, this thing that we always say, that when you learn how to ride a bike, you never forget how to ride a bike. And it seems to me that linguistics might be one of those things, because it looks like you've been writing a paper this morning. To be honest with you, you sound like you are totally into it, and it's very impressive. It's admirable, and well, I want to join everybody who's been writing on the chat about how great the talk has been and how inspirational and actually charismatic, they say, and I agree.
Thank you very, very much. I don't know what to say. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it very much. Great questions too. I agree.
So, do we have any more questions? Any final questions? There's actually one that just came up, very timely. Thomas Sakabian asks the following one, Kai. This will be the last one, okay, in the interest of time. When I went to Israel and I spoke to a taxi driver in English, it took him 1 minute to identify that I'm from German, even though I was raised in Spain, but I admit that my mother tongue is German. Which accent would another bilingual person adopt who is really bilingual and learn both languages from the start?
Yeah, that's super interesting. And honestly, that's something, had I stayed in the field, that's something I would have definitely devoted time to study. Because I think it's not, at least I don't know enough about it. So, I mean, if you're a native German speaker and acquire later on English, I'm not really that surprised that someone can identify you as a German speaker, because you have the German phonology in your mind, you apply it to the English words, and it ends up sounding German. That's, here's a bigger, well, slightly bigger mystery. I'm a bilingual German-Spanish speaker, but when I speak English, I've been told I have a German accent, right? Which blows my mind, really, because I feel, I'd say, at least at this point, definitely more at home in Spanish than in German. But then again, English is a Germanic language, right? So maybe that is why there's those both languages are closer, and that's why it's more likely for me to have a German accent. So I'm wondering if one starts to study that stuff, what happens with trilinguals, if this is really the reason, right? You can test that. Take bilingual speakers, typologically different bilingual speakers, acquiring a third language, and see if the closer language, being closer helps the L3 or L2. It's an interesting question, to which I don't have a good answer, except that I love the question. I would love to know more.
That's great. So, well, before we adjourn, I would like to remind you that in a few days, the talk will be available on the YouTube channel, the specific session of the Bilingualism series. So please go ahead and share it with those that might be interested. Kai, I definitely encourage you to try to read the chat, because there's lovely things that are being said about your talk and about you there. So you may want to actually copy paste. That's my advice. And maybe paste it into a Word document so that you have it for future reference is beautiful. Don't forget the European Day of Languages that the cultural office is actually now advertising in the chat. Okay, please join us and join the newsletter, subscribe, and you'll get a lot of activities that are organized here in Manchester at the Instituto Cervantes. And now I will give the floor to Pedro Eusebio Cuesta, our director. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kai, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Pleasure's been all mine.
Marco Switch, muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure. We have learned a lot, and we have noticed, all of us, that there is so much to learn about bilingualism, how to approach it. So many questions open, so we will continue with this series. Thank you, Kai. It was great, wonderful, Julio. And as Julio said, we hope to have you again next week with the polyglots Richard Simcott, who has studied over 50 languages, and Andreas Wolf, German, a BBC correspondent, and he had already learned 10 languages. So thank you very much. Muchas gracias y buenas noches y hasta la próxima.
Gracias.
Gracias.